I found him by the sound his breathing made, which was the sound of a man arguing with the idea of dying and not winning. It was past midnight, and well past the hour any sensible woman is out of doors in the cold, and I was out of doors in the cold because my goat had got loose again, and a loose goat at the frost end of autumn is a dead goat by morning. So I had a lantern and a temper and a shawl I was losing, and I came down the back lane past the old root cellar, and there in the dark between the woodpile and the wall was a great dark shape that turned out, when I lifted the light, to be a man bleeding into the dirt. I am Wren. I am 23, a healer's daughter, and a healer in my own small way. The lowest ranked Omega in a village that does not have very many ranks to be lowest of. I have set bones and pulled fevers and closed more wounds than I can count, and I knew within 3 seconds of lifting that lantern that this man would be dead by dawn if I left him, and dead a little slower if I helped him, because a stranger bleeding in the dark at the frost end of autumn is a stranger somebody put there. I helped him anyway. I want that on the record, since the record came to matter so much later. Nobody made me. I could have walked past. I knelt in the cold mud and got my shoulder under his arm, and I made the decision before I knew one single thing about him, before I knew his name, before I knew what he was worth, before I knew there were riders. I got him into the cellar. I do not know how. He was twice my weight, and the stairs are bad, and he came round just enough at the bottom to stop being entirely dead weight, and to grip my wrist with a hand like a manacle, and say, very clearly, into my face, "The boy. Where is the boy?" There was no boy. There was just him, and me, and the dark. I told him there was no boy, and he looked at me as if I had confessed to losing something precious of his, and then his eyes rolled back, and he was gone again, and I lit the lamp and got to work, and that is how it started, with a question I could not answer about a child who was not there. He was there by morning. The child, I mean. I found him the way you find a wild thing, by holding very still until it decides you are furniture. I had gone up at first light to deal with the goat, who had the gall to be standing at the gate, as though she had not cost me a man's life, and most of a night, and when I came back down to the cellar, there was a boy, crouched in the corner behind the cider barrels, with his arms around his knees and his eyes on the stranger, and a kitchen knife of mine held in one small fist like he meant it. He was perhaps 5, filthy, half feral with fear. He had come in through the cellar's low window in the night, drawn to the only thing in the world he knew, and he had been there the whole time I worked, watching me put my hands on his man, deciding whether to use the knife. I did not reach for him. I sat down on the bottom stair, a careful distance off, and I told him my goat's name and what an idiot she was, and I kept talking, low and dull, about nothing, the goat, the frost, the way the cider had not turned out this year, until the knife came down an inch, and then another, and somewhere in the second hour he fell asleep where he sat, because a body that small cannot hold that much fear awake forever. His name was Bram. It took 2 days to learn that much. He gave it to me the way you hand someone a coin you cannot afford to lose, and after that he would not leave my side, would not leave the cellar at all, and looked at the door every time the wind moved, as if the wind might be coming for him specifically. I learned to read the two of them like weather. The man slept and burned and woke in pieces, and in the pieces he said things. Not to me, through me, past me, to people who were not there. A name, over and over, like a splinter he could not work out. Varick, and once, gripping the boy's wrist where Bram had crept up to put a hand over his heart, "Not yet. Not yet, we're not safe yet, keep him from the windows." And the boy, 5 years old, nodded as if this were an old and familiar instruction, and moved away from the windows. You do not have to be a clever woman to know that a man who fevers about windows and a name and a boy he is dying to protect is not a man who fell down drunk in a lane. I am not a clever woman, particularly, but I am not that kind of fool. I knew he was running from something. I told myself it was none of my business who, that my business was the wound and the fever and the child, and I held to that for 3 more days, which I now understand was the last of my innocence about the whole affair. Then the wanted notice came to the village square, and I went to read it like everyone else, and I stood in the cold with the whole village around me, and read the description of the man dying in my cellar. The notice was nailed to the meeting post, fresh, the ink barely set. A reward in gold that made the baker whistle. A name I did not recognize, and a list of crimes I will not repeat, because half of them turned out to be lies, and the other half were somebody else's. Treason, the murder of a child of the royal line. An enemy of the crown, most wanted across every territory the Iron King held, to be taken alive if possible and dead if not, by order of the War Council, sealed with the seal of the Alpha King himself. I read it twice. Then I read the part about the murdered child of the royal line, and I thought about the 5-year-old asleep in my cellar, with his arms around the supposed murderer's neck, and something in the story did not sit flat. A man does not die protecting the windows of a child he murdered. I went home the long way, the way that did not pass anyone's eyes, and I stood at the top of my own cellar stairs for a long time before I went down. Because here is the thing nobody puts on a wanted notice. The moment you read one, you are no longer a woman who found a stranger in a lane. You are a woman hiding the most wanted man in the kingdom. And a child the entire War Council believes is dead, and you have a choice to make, and every version of it is dangerous, and there is gold enough on that post to buy my whole village, twice over. I went down. The lamp was burning where I had left it. The man was awake. He was awake and lucid for the first time, propped against the cellar wall, grey as ash, with Bram tucked under his arm and one big hand spread over the boy as if he could shield him from the whole world with a palm. He watched me come down the stairs, and he watched my face, and whatever he had been planning to say, he changed it when he saw what I had read written all over me. "You've seen the notice," he said. "You're worth more dead than I'll earn alive." I came the rest of the way down. Most wanted man in the kingdom. Killer of a royal child. I looked at the royal child in question, who looked back at me with grave, dark eyes. He doesn't seem very dead. Something went out of the man then, some last brace he had been holding. "No," he said. "He doesn't, does he? Your name's not the one on the post." "It is not." He was quiet a moment, deciding, and I watched him decide to trust me, watched it cost him, because a man who has been running this long does not give his name away cheaply. "Asmund, the boy is Bram. He is the heir of the Western Hold, and the only living one, and the man whose seal is on that notice, has spent a year telling the kingdom I cut this child's throat." His hand tightened on Bram's shoulder. "I have been carrying the proof that I did not across 4 territories with a hole in my side, trying to reach the one person who would believe it, and I did not reach him. And now I am bleeding in a stranger's cellar, and the stranger has read the lie before I could tell her the truth." "Who?" I said. "Who's the one person?" He looked at me, and the answer was the worst possible answer, and he gave it anyway. "The Alpha King. Soren, he sealed the notice for my death. A breath. He is also the only man alive who would take one look at this boy and know him, and tear the lie apart with his own hands, if I could get him into the same room as the truth before his war council got me into the ground. His jaw worked. He was my brother. Before all this. Sworn, not blooded, but it was the truer kind. Whoever poisoned him against me knew exactly what they were taking. I sat down on the bottom stair, which was becoming my place for receiving news that rearranged the floor. I had thought my choice was whether to keep hiding a fugitive from the king or to give him up. That was not the choice. The choice was whether to believe a dying man over a sealed royal notice, and then whether to do the one thing that would either end a war or end all 3 of us, get the king and the truth into the same room before the people who built the lie could stop it. I have never in my life wanted so badly to have walked past a man in a lane, The riders came the next morning, and they came in the king's colours, and the king was with them. You hear an alpha king before you see him, not because he is loud, because the world goes quiet in front of him the way a field goes quiet before weather, every bird and dog and gossiping woman falling still. And you look up to see why, and there he is. Sauron of the Iron Reach came down my frostbitten lane on a horse the colour of storm, with 30 warriors at his back, and his war council riding close, and I stood in my own doorway with my hands wet from the wash, and understood that the lane I had dragged a dying man up 4 nights ago was about to become the most important place in the kingdom, and that I, Ren, lowest omega of a nothing village, was standing in the door of it. He was not what the notices made him sound. The notices made him sound like a blade. He was more like the weight a blade comes down with. He dismounted without hurry, and looked at my cottage, and looked at me, and there was a tiredness in him, under the iron that no one had put on any post, the particular grey exhaustion of a man fighting a war he grieves. We had word, he said, of a stranger sheltered in this village, a wounded man. His eyes did not leave my face. You have the look of a woman with something in her cellar. A man at his shoulder leaned in before I could answer. Older, silver at the temple, a general's chain and a smile like a closed door. This, I would learn, was Varric, who held the war council in his hand the way I held a lamp. If she's hiding him, Varric said, easy and reasonable, she's a traitor, and the cleanest thing is to burn the cellar with him in it and save your grace the trial. We've lost men to this animal. Don't let a village woman cost you more. Burn the cellar. With Bram in it. He said it the way you suggest closing a window. I have been afraid in my life. I had never before been afraid and furious in the same breath, and I found that the fury was the louder of the two. You'd burn a cellar you haven't looked in, I said to the general, not the king, to spare your king the trouble of finding out he's wrong. That's not loyalty. That's a man in a hurry to keep a door shut. I turned to Sauron. There's a wounded man in my cellar. There's also a child. If your general gets his fire, you'll have burned a 5-year-old to save yourself an afternoon, and you'll never know whose. The lane went very still. Sauron looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked at Varric, and something moved behind his face that the general did not like at all. I'll look in the cellar, the king said. I am going to leave him at the top of those stairs for just a moment. He can wait. Kings turn out to be very good at waiting. Because if you have come this far with me, through the goat and the lamp and the child with the knife, you are the sort of person who wants to know what he found down there. And I am the sort who wants to tell you. So let me ask the small thing first. Follow along, tap subscribe, leave a light on for the next one. I tell these the way they happen to me, which is to say from the bottom of the stairs and usually slightly out of breath. There. Now we can go down. He went down alone. I made that a condition, and he allowed it, which told me more about him than the notices had, that an alpha king would let a rankless woman set him a condition on her own stairs, in front of his men, because she had said the word child, and meant it. I went down ahead of him with the lamp. Asmund was sitting up against the wall, spent and grey but upright, with Bram tucked into his side, and when the king's boots came down the stairs behind me, I watched 2 men who had been brothers see each other across a year of war and a sealed death notice and a lie big enough to bury a kingdom. Neither of them said the other's name. That was the thing I noticed. Neither would say it. As if the name were the last bridge and saying it would commit them to crossing. The king's eyes went from Asmund's face, searching it, hating it, something underneath the hate flinching, down to the child curled into his enemy's side. And Bram, who had held a knife on me for 2 days, who would not go near the door, who flinched at wind, looked up at the most powerful man in the kingdom, and did the thing none of us could have made him do. He let go of Asmund. He crossed the cellar floor. And he stopped in front of the king and looked up and said, in the small, flat voice of a child reciting the only safe thing he knows, I'm not supposed to tell strangers my name. But Asmund says, You knew my father. I watched the Alpha King go down on one knee on my cellar floor, slowly, the way a wall comes down, and I watched him look into the face of a child the entire kingdom believed he had failed to save. A child wearing a dead man's eyes, and I watched the war go out of him and something far worse come in, because if the boy was alive, then everything Soren had done for a year, every campaign, every name on every notice, every grave, had been built on a lie, and he was kneeling in the wreckage of it on a dirt floor by the light of my one lamp. Bram, he said. Just the name. It broke in the middle. It was, I think, the first time in a year anyone had said the child's name as if he were alive. Bram seemed to feel the weight of it. He reached out and patted the king's iron shoulder twice, gravely, the way you comfort a horse, and said, "It's all right. Ren has a goat." I would like to tell you the truth came out clean after that, and the war ended, and we all went up the stairs into the sun. That is not how lies die. Lies have people keeping them alive. And the man keeping this one was standing in my lane with a general's chain and 30 of the king's own warriors, and he had heard the king say the dead child's name. Varric moved that night, because men like Varric always move at night, and because he understood before the rest of us that a living heir and a breathing Asmund were two truths that would cost him his head by morning. The king had taken rooms at the village's one inn and posted men and given orders that nothing was to happen until daylight, until he could hear the whole of it. Reasonable, kingly, it assumed the danger was something you could post a guard against. The danger was inside the guard. I was in the cellar, because I would not leave them. With the lamp turned low, and Bram finally asleep across my lap, and Asmund drifting in the grey between waking and not, when I heard the cellar door open at the top of the stairs that should have been bolted and was not, because Varric had spent the evening being the helpful general who checks the bolts. He came down with a knife and no torch, and he was very good and very quiet. And he had clearly done this kind of work before. He had a story ready for the morning. I could see it on him the way you see a man's next 3 moves. The fugitive, cornered, had taken the woman and the boy with him. A tragedy. The general had arrived too late. 3 bodies and a closed door and the lie safe for another year. He came for Asmund first, because Asmund was the proof that could speak. I did not think. There is a great deal of nonsense talked about courage, about deciding to be brave, and none of it is true, or at least it was not true on my cellar floor at the dark end of that night. I did not decide. I put the sleeping child off my lap, and I put my body between the knife and the man who could not get up, and the blade that was meant for Asmund's throat went into my shoulder instead, and the pain of it was a white noise that ate the whole world for a moment. But I had got what I needed, which was noise. I had screamed, not from fear, on purpose, the loudest sound I have ever made in my life, and a scream in the dead quiet of a guarded village at the dark end of night does a thing a knife cannot do quietly. It brought the king. Soren came down those stairs like the weather finally breaking, and what he found was his trusted general standing over a bleeding village woman with a knife, a living heir screaming in the corner, and the sworn brother he had spent a year hunting using the last of his strength to drag himself in front of the child. There is no story Varric could have told that would survive that tableau, and I watched him understand it, watched the smooth go out of his face, watched him reach for the only move he had left, which was to finish at least one of us before the king's hands closed on him. He went for Bram. I was already down and bleeding, and I will be honest with you all the way to the bottom of this. I do not know where I found it. I got a hand around the general's ankle from the floor, just that, just one hand, a healer's hand with no strength left in it, and it was enough. It tipped him half a step. Half a step was all the king needed. I will not describe what the Alpha King did to the man who had built a war on a murdered child who was not dead. It is not the kind of thing this story is for. I will say only that Varric did not rise from my cellar floor, and that the lamp got knocked over in it and very nearly gave him the fire he had wanted for all of us. and that it was Bram, 5 years old, the heir of the Western Hold, who stamped it out with both small feet, furious, before the spilled oil could catch the cider. Then it was just the breathing again. Mine, ragged, Asmund's. The king's, hard, over the body of his general, in the wreck of everything he had believed. You stepped in front of a knife, Soren said. He was looking at my shoulder, at the dark spreading down my arm, and he did not seem able to look anywhere else. For a man the whole kingdom calls my enemy. He isn't your enemy. He's your brother. I had my hand clamped over the wound, and my voice was going thin, but I was not finished, because I had not bled on my own cellar floor to leave the most important part unsaid. The enemy is the one who taught you to call him that, and he's dead on the ground because a goat got loose and a village woman couldn't walk past a man in a lane. So you might want to ask yourself, Your Grace, how many other men you've buried on your general's word. He flinched. A king, flinching, in a cellar, at a healer with a hole in her shoulder. I have replayed that too. Then he tore his own cloak and held it hard to my shoulder with his own hands and roared up the stairs for every healer in the village and held the cloth there himself while he did it and did not let go. Here is the fallout, because there is always fallout. The war did not simply end because a child stamped out a lamp. Wars are easier to start than to call back. But the morning after that night, the Alpha King stood in my village square under the wanted notice with his own seal on it, and he tore it down with his own hand in front of his 30 warriors and a crowd of villagers who had never seen a king and would tell the story for the rest of their lives. He named Asmund cleared. He named Bram living and heir and under the crown's protection. He named Varric traitor over his own grave, and named the men of the war council who would answer for the year of lies. And then he did the thing that cost him most, the thing a proud man can barely make his mouth do. He said, aloud, before everyone, that he had been wrong, that he had let grief make him certain, and certainty had made him a weapon in another man's hand. And that the only reason the truth was standing in the square that morning was a village woman who had believed a dying stranger over a king's own seal. He looked at me when he said the last part. The whole square looked at me. I had a shoulder bound up to the neck and one arm in a sling, and Bram attached to my good hand with the grip of a much smaller manacle. And I had never in my life been looked at by so many people at once, and I discovered I could bear it, which surprised me more than anything else that week. Edric, the king's second, a steady man who had been one of the few on that council to doubt Varric out loud and pay for it, came to me privately after and bowed. To me. An omega from a village with one inn. He doesn't bend, Edric said of his king. I've served him 11 years. He doesn't bend for anyone. He looked at where the king stood with Bram now climbing him like a tree. He bent in your cellar. It is the turn of the year now, hard winter, the kind that makes you grateful for a cellar and a lamp. I did not go back to my village, in the end, though I go often, and the goat, who started all of this, and has never once been held accountable, has the run of a stable far better than she deserves. I am at the Iron Reach, where the great hall has a wolf throne and a library that smells of cold stone, and a kitchen I am not allowed to work in, which we are still arguing about. Bram is here, growing less feral by the week, sleeping through more nights than not, learning that windows are only windows. He calls me Wren still, not anything grander, and he calls Asmund his and the king his in a way that has knit those two brothers back together more surely than any treaty, because it is very hard to keep hating a man a child loves in front of you. Asmund lived. He limps, and he will limp for good, and he stood as the boy's sworn shield again at the midwinter court, with his name restored over the door of the Western Hold, and the first time he and Soren laughed at the same thing in the same room I had to leave, so that neither of them would see a grown woman cry over two men remembering they were brothers. And the king. The king courts me with all the grace of a man who has commanded armies and never once asked anyone to dinner. He is formal where he should be easy, and silent where he should speak, and he leaves things, books mostly, on healing, which is either very thoughtful or a hint about my shoulder. I have not decided. His wolf has no such trouble. His wolf decided the matter in my cellar that first morning, and has been unsubtle about it ever since, and lies across my feet in the great hall in front of his entire court while the king pretends not to notice, which fools no one and delights Bram enormously. He came to me at midwinter, in the library, with the lamp lit. There is always a lamp lit now, in the open, where anyone can see it. I have not slept in the dark since the cellar, and he has never once asked me to. He stood 3 paces off the way he does, the distance he keeps like a held breath, and he said my name the way he said Bram's that first night, like it cost him, and was worth it. You told me to ask myself how many men I'd buried on a lie, he said. I have not stopped asking. I don't intend to. I'd rather be a king who can be told he's wrong by a woman with a goat than a king no one dares correct. The corner of his mouth, which I have learnt to watch for. His wolf knew you in the dark before I knew your name. I have spent a winter catching up to him. I would like to stop running behind my own heart, if you'll have a proud man who is trying to be a better one. I will not tell you exactly what I said, or about the kiss that came after, except that it was the first thing in the whole affair that did not happen in the dark, and that when it ended, the war in me ended too, the low constant readiness to grab a knife or a lamp or a goat, the bottom of the stairs watchfulness I had worn so long I'd forgotten it was a weight, all of it set down at last. In a warm room in the open, by the light of a lamp no one had to hide. His wolf knew me in the dark before he did. I have made my peace with being the last to understand the most important things. I was last about the man in my lane, last about the child, last about the king. But I got there, slowly, and with a hole in my shoulder, and one armful of borrowed air at a time. I got there, so tell me, when did you know? When did you see that the man in the cellar was never the danger, and the danger had ridden in wearing the king's own colours? Come find me in the comments and tell me how early you caught it, because I caught it late, the way I catch everything, from the bottom of the stairs. And tell me where you're listening from tonight. I like knowing where in the world the lamp is burning. If this one kept you up past a sensible hour, stay. There's always another, and there is always, I promise you, a goat. Subscribe, and I'll tell you the next one the way it happened to me.